play the director's statement.
It was shortly after I graduated college in the mid 1980s when I had the sort of serendipitous moment where I had first run into Wendell Castle's book while roaming around the art library at West Virginia University, and it wasn't soon after that that I traveled up to my brother's home in Roxbury, Connecticut, to help him actually build a kitchen and do my first like major woodworking project. And my brother lived in a pretty magical place. He lived on Tophet Road, which was right next to Painter Hill Road, which I only mention because he lived right next to the Calder estate. And not that, so Calder's widow, Louise, I think was her name, lived there, and she used to run over my brother's mailbox on a daily basis. Maybe it was more like monthly. It's more humorous to think of it as daily. And I set about on my first, I guess, serious woodworking project, in that we built my brother's kitchen. The two of us built it from scratch. We also went out and went to an old marble quarry and got the hearthstone, and that's when I first really met Tommy and interacted with Tommy. So I don't think I really knew the scope of his work then. I knew that Tommy and my brother had built his favorite piece of furniture was a cool little funky writing desk with all the little cubby holes in it, and you know, it's like many moments in your life where you don't really sort of realize the gravity of it until you know, until years and years later. And obviously, you know, here I am many years later with sort of the opportunity to sit here and take a look at Tommy's life with him, and sort of in that way also have a connection with my brother, who I was pretty close with.
So the first time that I was, I guess, exposed might be one word, or first time I ran into Tommy Simpson's work was when I was at school in Haywood Community College, 2004, 2005. I love these hearts. These hearts are great. So it was stuff like this that was on a chair that I saw of Tommy's. And Bob Gibson and Wayne Rabb, my teachers at Haywood, they presented his work in a slideshow, maybe a couple little points during one of our classes. And I was just taken by the joy and whimsy of Tommy's work. And it was, you know, it made me think of, I don't know, it was different. It made me think of times in my childhood where I was building tree forts and stealing wood from construction sites to help build tree forts, and it just made me feel good to be able to experience it. And I remember seeing some chairs, and then the remind me of Garden of the Heart. I saw some chairs and also Garden of the Heart. They were beautiful and different and colorful, and I mean, none of it looked like it came from a place that was only pure joy and pure, you know, just life. So it stuck with me ever since, and it kind of grounds me, because I try in my work to get there, but you know, it's a journey, and seeing Tommy's work makes that journey a lot more enjoyable.
Those are our director's statements, and it's sort of their first interactions with Tommy, and sort of sharing their love for Tommy and his work. And that was the impetus for this documentary that we'll watch now.
I want to remain and hold onto the times when my heart was a mitten, for then did I feel the comforting warmth from my dreamings, searching and discovery. My name's Tommy Simpson, and I grew up in Illinois, Dundee on the Fox River. And I was born August 12th, 1939, which was pre-war, and all this is according to my mother. My mother was disciplining me and scolded me. I have no awareness of this. She told me this story, that at that age, and she sat me down in the middle of the living room on a stool to think about what I had done. And she came back, 15 or 20 minutes later and told me that I'd taken all the shoelaces out of my shoes and I was making something out of it. The community of times then was that you'd have breakfast and get on your bicycle and come back for dinner. And you had the whole world out there to explore and adventure and discover and find out how you fit into it all, and a whole variety of different experiences, from fishing to playing catch-up baseball and all this kind of thing. As I grew older and had a chance to look back, is that adventurous life seemed to be the imprint of what I did for the rest of my life. Instead of just get a job and work for somebody, is that I looked for the adventure of and discovery of finding things and doing things with your hand and your body, and that made me happy, so that I found out that I was an artist whether I knew it or not.
I mean, I always think of Tommy as just the ultimate maker, because he's got the joy of just sort of experimenting with materials and making things. It's not, whether it's painted on panels, whether it's making furniture and painting it, whether it's wooden furniture that he paints with wood species. He's just interested in exploration and making. The joy of actually almost sketching three-dimensionally with materials. He doesn't do all these elaborate kinds of schematics and construction blow-ups and test joints. He just has at it.
As we all are, we have no choice in our parents, or do we, sort of rethink what life was about when you're 5 years old? It's like wherever your parents did, that seems what life was about, and I never thought about it until, I've reached this age that I am now, that looking back and realizing that a lot of the experiences were very different than a lot of kids' experiences. And it was a very viable connection to Mother Nature. I mean, it wasn't like you go to school and they say this is what Mother Nature's like. It's like you're out there in it, your hands are wet, your feet are wet, and that kind of thing. And so it was much more influential aspect to my life than I really had realized. Contemplate a mountain red, trees upon a yellow head. Think of good and jolly times, stomach pie and eyes of pine. Think of skies wrapped in twine, wishing you a kiss of mine. Remember this, my Valentine.
Well, first of all, we have to say that Tommy was born special, so he just came that way. And I think a lot of his career has been about returning to a kind of childhood way of looking at the world. You know, I'm reminded of the thing that Picasso may or may not have said, that it took him years to learn to draw like a child again. And I feel like Tommy kind of never lost that magic. It's like he sees the world through an innocent pair of eyes that most of us just don't have access to. So for me, there's this quality of, well, the kind of quality that you get by spending a time with a child, sort of charm, idiosyncrasy, but also honesty and straightforwardness and a kind of directness or simplicity that Tommy really embodies.
I came home and I said, I was 17, and I told my mother, or I was 18, I'm going to go around the world. So she said, fine. So she put me in the car and drove me to Elgin, and I got on the bus and went to California, to LA for 2 weeks, and went up to San Francisco and took a freighter to Hawaii. And it was going around the world, and I worked there for 6 months for a Japanese company in construction. Then I was going to go to New Zealand, and I felt guilty that I should go back to school. So I went back to school and went to Northern Illinois and studied business. And then you could take electives. So I thought I hadn't had a chance to make anything, or use your hands or any of that sort of thing. So I signed up for a printmaking class, and the teacher there, Keith Baker, showed me and convinced me and told me I was an artist. It was like, okay, now explain to me, what is an artist? Because I'd never gone to a museum, or anything, I'd always made things, but never had anything to do with art or any of that sort of thinking. And so I realized that I was an artist whether I liked it or not, Well, the art is sort of enjoyable. It's all an aspect of our culture and literature and everything else, and it's to be aware of what your heart is asking. And I sort of funnily enjoyed the hearts, because if you say heart, people say, oh, that's sentimental, it's like kid stuff, forget it. Until you give them one, and then they really enjoy it, It's a very strange combination. And that's the source of goodness and kindness and caring and friendship. That's a symbol of it versus your brain. It's like, are you an Einstein? You talk about your brain, or there's other symbols of things. And that was always a symbol of that sort of thing, which is a real defense against angst. This is the little box I made that's a head. And you open up the head, and it's filled with heartfelt thanks. You can see it's made out of felt, and it's something that I give to people when I need to give them a heartfelt thanks. And it's sort of a pun mobile, or whatever you call it. It's pun for fun. Anyway, so that's it.
He thinks of furniture as a parameter within which he's going to work. It's, instead of having a blank slate, what he's doing is saying, there's this whole thing called furniture, that gives me a few boundaries within which I can really explore. And if you look at sort of the ways in which he's done series of pie safes, tables, etc., chairs, you can start to see how, if you lined up all the chairs that he's made over time, it's incredibly varied, but it's within the chair format: 4 legs, a back, arms oftentimes. So to me, function is it's just a boundary within which he's functioning. And then I think he's one of these people, does he think of it as art? I think he just thinks of it as creation more than anything else. And he sort of leaves it up to you as to how you want to categorize it. I mean, that's what I said, that idea that he's linking his joy in creating and fooling around, and then hopefully bringing joy to wherever these objects end up.
The ice guy would sit outside, and one day I'd just say hello to him when I walked by. One day I stopped and said hello, and he had a Labrador. The Labrador came walking up and he had a newspaper in its mouth. I thought that's unusual. And so he trained the dog to go up 4 or 5 blocks to the drugstore, and the people knew the dog, so they put his newspaper in his mouth, and the dog would bring it back to him at the ice house. Growing up with those kind of existing stories, it's hard not to put stories and narrative in that are enjoyable in one's work. I've spent time making things and using myself, my imagination and my ideas, and come success or failure made no difference. It was the fun of doing it and the pleasure. And so I've worked making furniture and making paintings and doing printmaking and ceramics and jewelry, restoring cars, designing houses and building them, building gardens. I've made Christmas cards for people, Christmas ornaments for people. I've made toilet seats for people. I've made garden gates for people. I've written 4 or 5 books. I've done a whole variety of things for the pleasure and fun, and you learn things and you fail many times. And so there was much more idiosyncratic self-realization that to find out who you were and how you relate to the world, and that was, I found, a gift to myself to be able to do that, give it to other people. I guess my definition of idiosyncratic is to actually believe in yourself and apply and allow yourself to be you by either using your body or your mind or a little of everything to, and don't judge whether if you bake a pie is worse than making a painting. They both take imagination and self-discipline and skill, and to give yourself much more self-value than the world gives to you, and to go ahead and just do it. You can tell a 3-year-old to do that and they'll happily do it. You tell a 15-year-old and they're like apprehensive, because they've been taught differently. And at least keep that alive in your being, because that's what people respond to, is actually being you versus, the rhetoric of some institution.
That exhibition was a kind of pocket utopia, is the way I would describe it. So, it's this sort of fenced garden with all of this wondrous organic life, which of course he's made by hand, in it, and words, poetry and inspiration scattered throughout, and images, symbolic forms. And it really taps into a very, very deep current in not just American life, but in human life. Really, all cultures have this idea of the enclosure with plants and life and growth and food and sustenance as being a place of perfection, of hope, of idealism. And it's very, very interesting to me that he decided to commit one of his most ambitious projects to that metaphor, that idea of the garden, because it seems to me like he has always known that making can be a kind of utopia, even if only temporarily.
My Aunt Florence painted flowers. Her whole house was full of flower paintings. That's what she did just to occupy her time. And my other Aunt Mary was sort of always odd to me because, well, she had me playing the piano with one finger, kind of thing, when you were like 5 years old, or 4. And she would take me out into the woods and we'd pick wildflowers and take them back to my other aunt to paint. And then they'd sit me down with a canvas that was, 3 by 5 to paint the flowers, which, if that's what you want me to do, I'll do it for sure. Probably my motive for doing it. My home sat so close to the Fox River that at bedtime one could pull the waters over oneself, blanketing the dark night away, washing out the day's scold to reveal a bright new way.
A bed is very representative of home and the idea of not just domesticity, but also safety and this idea of nesting that he often talks about. And again, the idea of dreaming. So that's where we do our dreaming in bed. And so he often makes his beds very explicitly speak of the kind of unloosed fantasy that happened during the nighttime hours. A chair, similarly for him, is a kind of anthropomorphic object. It relates to the body. So it's a portrait, maybe of himself, maybe of a potential user, but it's like a thing out there in the world that corresponds to you and somehow externalizes your inner life.
Ladder is, you're here and it takes you somewhere else. And it's used symbolically in a lot of literature, the Jacob's ladder and the ladder of success, all this kind of thing. If you have 6 rungs or something, in between each one is like 6 paintings. It's like 6 series of, it's like you did a series of paintings. So I used it in that sense, and it was fun to put all kinds of different narratives or stories in the ladders. I hope to leave encouragement for everyone to try to be as creative and take advantage of the creativity that's actually in them. I was lucky that I could spend 60 years in a world that I created. And if they see somebody else did it and be encouraged by that, and don't be discouraged or turned down and say, oh, it's not good enough, you can't write, or you can't paint, or you can't do gardening, because that everybody is creative in some form or another. To believe that aspect of their own being, if I could leave that as that people would really be encouraged, would be great.
see that? Yeah. Okay. Great. So I love how Glenn Adamson in the documentary called it a pocket utopia, garden of the heart. And I'm thrilled that there was such great footage in the documentary of that incredible project, because we don't have very good photos of the time when it was at Fuller Craft Museum back in 2002, I believe, when we were Fuller Museum of Art. So, but it's one of the few exhibitions that continues to percolate and bubble to the surface every so often. And we repeatedly get people talking about how wonderful it was. And I only wish that I could have seen it at Fuller Craft Museum. Okay. And then this chair here was part of our Made in Massachusetts studio furniture of the Bay State. And from what I understand, Tommy, this piece was created when you were teaching a rocking chair workshop at Boston University's program in artisanry. And it was part of a conceptual exercise to help stretch the students' imagination. I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, the wonderful PIA group, that a lot of the furniture things, they would take 4 weeks to make a chair, and I told them we should make one in 2 days, just to change their thinking. And so overnight I made this chair just to intimidate them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really a great example of the imaginative way in which you look at the creative process, and then also pass that along to students and others that you come into contact with. And I have to ask you if this was in some way referencing your early childhood experimentation with shoelaces that your mother encountered.
It could be. It was called Wrapped Up in My Work.
Yeah.
But
Love it.
yeah, they were from out in Pennsylvania. You get balls of rags that were torn up that they made rugs out of, rag rugs.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what I wrapped around it.
Yeah. And then I have a photo of, I think that was taken when I was there at your studio, and I just loved how it was kind of nestled in there amongst all your other creations. And this is the Stories We Tell, Love Letters to the Natural World. And that was part of a series of exhibitions that we did under the umbrella of the Stories We Tell. And it was your work, Michelle Holzapfel and Binh Pho. And your exhibition contribution honored the natural environment that surrounds us. And the quote that I just love of yours describing the show was, "It honors the inhabitants we share this planet with, both human and animal, as we engage with our environment in the pursuit of living. Friends, family, sweet tooths, flowers, moons, wind, rain, music, art, love, home, lightning, trees, sun, windows, animals, and words name a few of life's wonders represented in the artwork." So I just really am so taken by the fact that you had all these incredible inspirations, but yet still under the one theme of the natural world. And again, it was such a joyful presentation for people to come and experience. And it was my first time being able to work with you. And in fact, I have here my Tommy Simpson heart from back then.
Yeah, good.
And then go ahead, Tommy.
I think one of the wonderful things is that there was a little table on the other side there where people could sit down and write their own thank you to the natural world.
Oh, yeah.
They did, which was really fun to read what they'd written.
Yeah, and I think too, your work has always just really resonated with people on such an immediate and accessible level. And that's something that I just have heard over the years about your work pretty continually. So, and this was our most recent collaboration, Playtime in the Making. And this was an exhibition that we had back in 2018. It was a multimedia art installation that explored the vital role of free play and creative thinking. And this was a very complex and imaginative cross-disciplinary project that was developed as part of a team. And It was you and Karen LaFleur, Marlow Shami, Nancy Tucker, and then there were also guest artists, Jim Fawcett and Randy Gilman. And the whole group of you came together to really investigate the question, what does play look like and where does it reside within the creative process? And I feel like that's really a question and a pursuit that you have been looking at your entire life since you were a young child. And I think, you know, this was such a wonderful opportunity for us to bring in this notion of play in creativity and really open up people's minds to being able to just not, you know, try to wrestle with something when they're in the creative process. And I'm wondering too, if I could ask you the role of collaboration in your work, because I think, you know, that seems to be something that is somewhat of a through line throughout.
Yes, it was a lot of fun because each one had specific skills and they added, and some wrote music and did filming and computer work and said, this is a good idea, or that's a, or, and if you constructed, you could sort of the house form, it took two people to actually put it up. One person couldn't do it. So it was the idea of that there was a garden at the beginning with a gate. So if you want to be creative or artful, you walk through, you have to, a doorway you walk through, and then it goes into a river with it in a table where it's where people get together and exchange ideas. And so it represented, you walked into the garden with an idea and you started working with everybody. And then when it started to go into fruition, there was a garden at the end. So you planted things to let it grow. And then once it was harvested, you put it on a boat and then went out into the world. And so all these people gave ideas and thoughts and a little imagery and all sort of thing, which was really a fun thing to do, you know.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that was the kind of installation that people could come to again and again and again, and you always find something new, and you always see a new way to look at the creative process and leave with abundant inspiration. So that was a great opportunity for us to have that.
Right.
And then also, you know, that installation talked a lot about, as you've said, play and the importance of creativity. And, you know, you had mentioned in the documentary that was really what you had hoped your legacy would be, is to encourage people to embrace their creative beings.
Yes,
which I think is
everyone, and they should, you know, be aware of it and take advantage of it for self-worth, you know, and playtime and things is, I always, you know, pun wise say it's fundamental, profundity.
Yeah.
With this emphasis on fun.
Capital F, capital U, capital N.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, were there times in your life where you had people in your life that tried to stifle your creativity or didn't really see things in quite the same way that you did?
Well, yes and no. I think it's true for everyone, you know, but I never cared much for success. Well, you might say fame and money and stuff. Was much more fun to just enjoy doing things. And after 63 years, I've been really lucky that there are a lot of wonderful people that were supportive in all that time.
Yeah.
And also, instead of marketing a particular item, as I worked, as they've said, in various media of all kinds. It's sort of, if you went out to dinner and in a fancy restaurant and they put a plate of peas in front of you, you would say, well, where's the salad? Where's the wine? Where's the potatoes and the meat? You know, but if instead of saying, I only do this, so I enjoy doing lots of things, for better or worse, whatever. And everybody's, you know, there are many people in history that, you know, were doctors, lawyers, or Indians in chief that also, you know, made things or grew gardens or sang songs and poetry. And it's just believe in yourself and just do it, you know.
And make that pie.
Yes.
And then we just have a few more images I wanted to share with our audience today, of some of your works that we have in the collection, and we're so fortunate to have them. This piece was in the Stories We Tell exhibition, Love Letters to the Natural World. This is the Ballad of Blossom Sweet, from, I believe, 2011. I have the date here. Yes, 2011. And I just, adore this piece. I think it's such a stellar example of your style, of your organic, playful, voluptuous, very specific vocabulary of forms. And I also really am drawn to the fact that it is not one of the painted or carved sculptures, that it is more, showing the natural wood. And then I just have a detail here of some of the different forms that you use repeatedly in your work.
Yes, over the years, I've used a lot of flower forms because Mother Nature, if you talk about beauty, she made the flower as a beauty to sort of the birds and bees of mankind, sort of that attracted, and the purpose of all the beauty was to create a new world, so that the seeds would fall on the ground, that if you ate from the berries and the fruit, and in our human world, the feminine is the flower, the beauty of mankind, and they're the only miracle workers who can create new life. And so it's always a fun to make flowers in all sorts of forms, to sort of remind myself of that fact.
Yes, and then of course the heart making an appearance.
Yeah, the heart is.
Yeah. And then we have this headboard that we've shown a number of times since it came to us. Sunny days, clear nights, and as Glenn Adamson said, it's beds are a place to dream, a place to sleep, a place to open up to your imagination. And this is certainly a fine example of this. And I think I have a lovely detail right there. And this is a bottle brush for the hair.
Right.
Yeah. And then finally, these are on display currently in our courtyard gallery, 3 of your bronzes that I believe have been shown periodically as part of other exhibitions. And these are on long-term loan, so hopefully we'll be able to hang on to these for a little while longer.
Yeah, they're like 6-7 feet tall.
Yeah.
Big bronzes. Yeah.
So that is kind of a recap of all the wonderful ways in which we've been able to work with you over the years. I believe from here, I'm going to toss it back to Kendall. I think we're going to hear from the filmmakers.
Oh, great.
Thank you, Tommy.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. I guess it's back in my ballpark here again. So thank everybody for showing up. I know the film got a little jumpy at certain points, so I would encourage people to go to our website, which is why-make.com, and you can go to the Tommy page and you can watch the full documentary a little less with the jumps. So Why Make? What is Why Make, and why did we make this film? So about 4 years ago, Rob and I were sitting in my studio, and we were having this conversation on what motivates us. Well, what excites us as artists, and we came up with this really unique idea of doing a podcast. Of course, I'm sure everybody out there has a podcast now, but 4 years ago, it was a fairly groundbreaking idea. But miraculously, 4 years later, Rob and I still persist in asking artists what excites them, what motivates them, why they make.
And we're just about ready to release our 50th episode of the Why Make podcast. And it's fun to look back at what we've accomplished in our journey, and it continues to grow. I mean, from episode to episode. And I'd like to mention too that an excuse, if you don't listen to podcasts, do it and start with Tommy. He's episode 38. One of our very favorite episodes. So we December of last year, we were able to sit down. Well, we released it. We sat down with him before that, but it's a fun episode to listen to of Tommy elaborating on a lot more than he did in the movie.
Yeah, so in the beginning, Rob and I just interviewed each other. We sat down, we put an iPhone between us, no fancy technology. We just put an iPhone between us, and we interviewed each other. And because Rob and I both attended Haywood Community College's woodworking program, which is in Haywood County, just west of Asheville, North Carolina, we thought we'd start talking with our friends in the greater Asheville area about, what motivates them. And the idea was to sort of create an oral history of this field that a lot of people don't really know about, woodworking and sculpture with wood and furniture. And the idea was never to have a how-to. In fact, we were very clear from the very beginning that there are many people out there covering the how-to. We were always uniquely interested in the why, and in specifically why make. I mean, that's the whole origin of our name, and that's what we continue to do.
So we kicked it off by going to Asheville. Well, it's a local mecca of makers. So there's a lot of creativity out in the hills of Western North Carolina, and that's where Tommy is living now. So it kind of makes sense that he's out there. But we went with our good friend Nick Beery, who provided technical assistance. He helped a lot with this movie. Without Nick, we wouldn't have been able to make this movie. And we started interviewing people in their studios, before the idea of the movie even came about. And those became some of our first few episodes of Why Make. And then came COVID, and we couldn't go to people's studios. So we pivoted, and we started going online and figured out that we could open up a whole much broader avenue to be able to do interviews and to be able to bring in possible guests that were never able to touch on by just traveling.
Yeah, and so, as he said, we had our good friend Nick Beery, who's a documentary filmmaker in Hillsborough, North Carolina, Beery Media. Go to beerymedia.com. And, as visual artists, both Rob and I are woodworkers and visual artists. I think we always thought about pushing new edges. And as you saw from this little introductory statement that I fumbled through, I've known Tommy for a long time. And as I got further into this project, I sort of realized the relevance of Tommy in this greater field, as Beth so wonderfully pointed out. And I said, why can't we do a documentary film? We started with the podcast when talking to Tommy, and we knew that as Tommy said, whether we failed, whether we fell on our faces, we knew nothing about making a film. The process was going to be enjoyable, and the results would be what they were, but the hope was to really sort of bring Tommy to the forefront. And as I also said, I lost my brother in 2010. I was really close to my brother, and I hadn't talked to Tommy in quite a long time since my brother's death. And part of this was kind of getting back to, feeling close to my brother. So, anyways, we've made the film. We continue to do the podcast. We're about to release our 50th episode in December, which is going to be with the wonderful artist Wendy Murayama. And this is going to be sort of a hybrid episode that we're going to release on YouTube. That's going to be sort of a visual podcast. We're going to have lots of images along with our conversation. So that's what we're working on in the future. And who knows, maybe another film.
Yeah, and lastly, in the 4 years of working on Why Make, it seems like we've gone more and more into doing different media. not just the pod. So you'll see more of that from what we are now calling Why Make Productions, as we explore these new possibilities. And, you know, we're going to continue to ask the question, why we make and why it's important to us.
Yeah. So hopefully that gives you a nutshell explanation of what Why Make is, and, you know, Why Make Productions. Again, you can visit our website, why-make.com. You can see we're on episode 48. We're going to do, coming out in November, is Melanie Fallick, who wrote the book.
Episode 46.
Oh, 46, yeah. Well, got hung up.
Parts 1 and 2, because it's a long podcast.
Yeah. Melanie Fallick, oh God, what's the name of her book again? Rob, you were not.
Her book, I don't know the whole entire subtitle, but it's called Making a Life.
Making a
And
Life, right.
It's a wonderful book where she visits makers of all sorts: wood turners, woodworkers, weavers, painters, knitters, and explores literally why they make. I mean, it really hit home with us to be able to talk with her about more than just process, but the spiritual level of making.
And of course, she has a Tommy connection. Tommy told us about her, and actually Melanie's parents owned 2 of Tommy's pieces, which now Melanie and her brother own, including her brother owns that fantastic black and white chair that's in the documentary. So again, I thank everybody for watching the film, and
thank you all very much.
Right. And as we end all our podcasts, why make?
Why make?
That being said, I wanted to shift gears. First of all, thank you for sharing a little bit more about your process going into the documentary. Shift gears a little bit to give Tommy some time to talk and speak for himself. We have a few questions from our audience already, but I wanted to reiterate verbally that you are welcome to leave questions for Tommy, Rob, Erik, and Beth in the chat, and I will relay them to them. I already have a few. I also left the Why Make website link in the chat as well. You should be able to copy and paste it into your browser if you'd like to go check it out. But that being said, Tommy, we have a few questions for you already. Janet wanted to know what artists and musicians have inspired your work so far. She was really curious about any sort of muses or inspirations that you've had, and wondered if you could share some more details on that.
Boy, well, things like Arthur Dove and Kandinsky, and people that sort of much more uniquely their imagery, other than pop, op or deconstructionists, which were marketing tools kind of thing. And not only that, it doesn't have to be painting images. There can be lots of other people. I mean, Wendell Castle was a good friend, and Sam Maloof, and different potters. And I've worked with Bill Sachs, and I made a bathroom, and he did the sinks and stuff. And it was sort of all kinds of activities of that nature that allowed one to, communicate and interrelate and enjoy something. So it could be of any field. Some people are good jugglers, and some make wonderful gardens, and some make canoes, and there's all kinds of things. And instead of just the established quote art craft world, and these are the people you should respect. There are lots of wonderful people in their backyards or in garages making wonderful things, and so I traveled more that road than the other one. Does that make any sense?
I think so. It sounds like your inspirations are varied and across multiple mediums, and that's really cool to hear. I think that speaks a lot to sort of your creativity and the pieces you make. I think we can see of varied forms and varied influences in all the things you make.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tommy.
When I grew up in the farm things, if there's Dr. Lawyers and Indian Chiefs, but if you wanted to know something, you'd ask a farmer, because if he didn't know, he didn't eat. So that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a sort of related question about what sort of creative adventures are you on now? What's going on now with Tommy?
Well, I'm doing a lot of writing because I got a stroke in my optic nerve, and so my vision, I can't drive anymore, and so I've been making hearts and flowers because I can get magnifying glasses and do that, and I've been doing a lot of writing and reviewing and sort of memoirs, as well as, and trying to encourage people to exercise their own abilities, and not be discouraged, because 10,000 years ago, people invented the spoon, and they invented cups and chairs and all this kind of coffee, and all this kind of thing. And there was no university to go to, and people made wonderful ceramic things 29,000 years ago, and there probably was no word for beauty or utility, and so just look to yourself to enjoy that aspect, because it gives you self-worth, and you don't need to put down other people to gain self-worth. You can see it within your own skills, and it's everybody has it. They just have to allow themselves to do it.
And actually, Tommy, don't forget to tell everybody about the retrospective you're having at the Craft Alliance in St. Louis in 2023.
Yeah, the Craft Alliance in January, it's opening up, and it's a mixed media, but it's sort of an idea of hands-on, idiosyncratic approach to creativity and finding oneself. And the work of mine is a mixed media to illustrate how a person did that. And the second part is to show how other people have done that, and also to encourage, if I can do it, you can do it. I'm not better than you are. I just chose to do that. And if you'd like that aspect in your life to go, go do it. Create pies, make a garden, learn to dance or play the flute, or or do athletics that your mind, body, and head are involved in, and not just sitting at a desk and people telling you do this and we'll give you so much an hour, where you're giving a service, but your inner being is not being necessarily tapped into.
Yeah, speaking of sort of non-traditional life paths, another question came in, says that it sounds like your mother was supportive of that creativity and your non-traditional life path as an artist, and they want to hear more about your mother.
Yes, my parents, well, it's, that was back in the, late 40s and 50s and things of that nature, but they were people then were very reticent about telling you what to do and what to not to do. But I think I had two brothers and a sister, and they treated us like a garden. They watered us and fertilized us and made sure everything was safe, and, and so whatever we did, they were behind us to try to help. And whether it led you to a particular avenue of success, or whether or not you just were exploring something, they were very helpful. I was very lucky to have that. As I said before, I deliberately flunked myself out of college. They said nothing, and I said, I'm going around the world, and they said happily sent me, let me go, that kind of thing.
It's incredible to have supportive parents, especially as you journeyed off on your own and started creating art. There's another question. This one comes from Beth, actually, that's on a related note, because she noted that you glean inspiration from everywhere, and she wants to know how you decide what to make and whether you usually work on more than one project at a time.
Yeah, I worked on several projects of all kinds. And if I made, 4 chairs, 2 of them I made for myself, and 2 of them I'd made, and 1 chair I might make for, you might say, the mercantile industry, could go into a gallery. And there are ones that I'd make for personal people. Somebody was retiring in Indiana from being a judge. And so I made a chair that had all kinds of legal aspects on the chair as sort of a reward for a life well spent. And I said I did garden gates for people, and
Can you do me a favor and turn that off, please? 'Cause I'm getting really, really irritated.
Let's make sure our microphones are muted so that we can all hear.
okay.
Thank you. There was an audience member. That being said, I have another specific question. This one comes from Jackie. Jackie is curious about how you came to incorporate poetry into your physical objects.
Well, all the things I've done to have a story. If you meet people, they have a story inside them. And so if you build something to come to life, there's a story there. That's like I put it versus just a design for marketing. And so a lot of the stories captured, like I made a chair that was a museum chair, and it had a lot of imagery that you'd find in museums, nude paintings and marble pillars and stuff. And I had a pair of mittens made for it. So it's the only chair I know it has its own mittens, you know, but that's the fun thing of, you know, is that serious or is that, you know, crazy or foolish, or I don't know what it is, but it saves you the angst of, you know, the DNA of mankind, who was, you know, nothing but, you know, crucified people for centuries, you know, or killed people and this kind of thing. I'd rather, you know, go and have fun with something. It's sort of homemade folly in a sense. Enjoy yourself, you know, that kind of thing. And I've been lucky that it's resonated with different people, and you know, and if it's closer, whatever you're doing is closer to yourself and it's showable. If you would allow yourself to be yourself, then if somebody actually loves you, they actually love you, and they don't love your car or your big house or, you know, your job or something like that, which is much more beneficial because that kind of thing. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
I think so. I have another question. I think this one is a testament to sort of not only your legacy, but how long you've been in the craft field. Solio asks, do you think craft artists are still marginalized by the fine art world, or has there been more acceptance over time?
In a certain way, I'm not sure that I could answer that, because I've spent, you know, historically you work in your studio and put it in a van and deliver it and then come back to the studio, and that sort of the outside world is now because of this, my situation, I'm viewing more of the outside world, but you know, I'm not sure I have enough information to as to who, what, where, and when. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful, after the Second World War, when a lot of women were working in factories because the guys were out in the field. And so in the late 40s, a lot of the university curriculums changed to the point where, you know, in the 40s, there were 3 women making furniture, and now there's 50% of them are the best furniture made by women, you know. It's a whole different category of things. And the handmade things is like, it's the story of your life. And instead of going to a department store and buying furniture, when you leave, you throw it away. It's like all these objects relate to your story, your poems. And I've always written stuff down. I never considered myself a writer, but you have ideas, instead of just letting them ephemerate and disappear. I just wrote them down, and then 30 years later, you had a collection of them, that kind of thing. Because everybody has thoughts. You wake up at night or think, and a lot of times they evaporate because you never write them down. And sometimes if you write them down, you discover a lot more about yourself than because everybody says I do whimsical things, but in the process of doing them, never occurred to me. It's like, this is what makes sense and have fun with. And it took me 40 years to find out that there was a word called whimsical.
Actually, I thought I'd make an historical moment here. I would have written it down, Kendall, but I don't type that fast.
That's okay.
He doesn't. He can't type.
I can't type. And unfortunately, there were, we collected so much in our interviews with Tommy, but something that's really interesting in terms of that craft versus fine arts world is that Tommy crashed that glass ceiling very early on. Tommy was in a show in 1966 called Fantasy Furniture, which was then at the American Craft Museum, which might have just been called the Craft Museum, but
Right.
it was what?
Yeah, the Craft Museum.
Yeah, the Craft Museum. And Tommy was one of the very first people to exhibit painted furniture. And that shattered the world. To that point, the notion of painting furniture was just considered a cardinal sin, and it wasn't done. And that show really put you on the map of the New York world, for better or for worse, as we can find out. But that show and another show that followed in 1969 called Objects USA really started to bridge that gap between the fine arts world and the craft world, as more craft artists started to explore with painting wood, with being very sculptural with their forms. And Tommy also wrote it was one of your first books. He wrote a book called Fantasy Furniture in what was 69? You wrote that book, or 68?
Yeah, I think it was 68, 69, somewhere in there.
Right, which is a wonderful book. I'd pull it off my shelf and show you, but I'd have to go get it. But yeah, it's not in print any longer, but you can find it, on Amazon or in booksellers. But, don't want to make your head too big, Tommy, but you were an important artist in the 60s.
Yeah, I never knew that.
I know. You probably didn't care.
Yeah, yeah, that was a fun show, the Fantasy Furniture. But if you take painted furniture, if you would look globally, the American Indians painted things, and the Swedish painted rose mauling, and the Japanese and the Indian. It wasn't like the first time it ever happened in the world. It's just because of the marketing kind of thing in this country that it wasn't necessarily apparent. But I have a degree in painting, so I did a lot of woodcuts and printed them. So there was a picture of an owl that was the first thing I ever did as an artist. And so after you carve them, and I thought, well, why don't I paint it after I printed it? And so I started carving and painting, which is sort of, I've always combined utility with beauty instead of separating the two, back and forth. And so, if you look at a human being, they've got all kinds of colors, and hair and, teeth and all kinds of things, and so I didn't restrict myself to say, so can a chair, or so can a cabinet, or a bed, or whatever. And I've made beds for somebody who weighed 300 pounds, and I've made a bed for someone that had to, instead of laying flat, it had to be on an angle because of their health, and all sorts of, which was fun to do. So a lot of it was going with one's instincts, or what enjoyable, instead of thinking that it's important, or it makes you view this way, or make a lot of money or anything, was never a motive. Anymore, if you meet people, and if you fall in love with somebody, it's, do they have money, or do they have a position, or all that kind of stuff? It's not important. It's what's in their heart, or what's in their head, kind of thing, that motivates you. And I've been very lucky that, I've done all, as I said, I did an ad for Playboy magazine, Freak Out with Hash, and I made a painted vase and flowers and plates and stuff. It was about cooking, and I did some, Joan Mondale, I think, did, when she was vice president, she did ceramics, so she was a big supporter of the crafts. So I made some Christmas ornaments for when they were vice presidents with some other people. And a whole variety of things. I've designed and built 2 houses. Sort of as a craftsperson, I had all the equipment and some of the education. And if you go buy a house, it was $350,000. But if you build it yourself, it was $125,000. So that was a solution to survival. That it was doable, that kind of thing.
Seems like you have a lot of, one, incredible experience, but 2, amazing relationships with people, whether that be from people watching and sort of understanding what people are like and all the different shape, sizes, colors people come in. And I think that influence shows. And one of our viewers is interested in hearing from Erik and Robb about how they've been changed or shaped by their relationship with you, Tommy.
Yeah, I think, all our connections and friends change, make us aware, and we learn things. And, I never thought of doing that, or they'll say, I tried that, but it works better with this tool or that color, and if I had a wood shop, which I did, where I could paint and things, but I had friends that were potters and jewelers and like Kristen here, we've done pottery together, and she had the expertise, and I just could walk in and doodle, and then leave it. But it was, a lot of fun and enjoyment, and it ties you in with all those potters for centuries who've sat at the same wheel and done the same thing. It sort of makes a connection, and the same with poetry. If you read William Carlos Williams, who wrote poem, and he was a pediatrician. And Abraham Lincoln actually wrote poems, but most people don't know. And, and you learn what they're doing and thinking, and it's, what would it be like if there was only one of us? It'd be a pretty lonely world, so make connections and enjoy that, and as I said, thank God for all the people. Like, you have spoons, and you have a clock, and you have chairs and cups and all this stuff. And somebody in history sat down and did it, And so we have a much fuller, available life now because of all the creativity that people in the past have done. Like a cup of coffee, everybody drinks coffee. And an Ethiopian goat herder saw his sheep eating these beans and then dancing around. And he's the one that discovered coffee and made the first cups and stuff. And changed our world. Yeah.
Actually, Robb, you want to talk a little about, what the films?
I'm going to talk just a teeny bit, but then Erik, I'm going to let you take it away, because you've had kind of a relationship with Tommy that's been developing a lot over the last year and a half or so. As we got into the idea of making this film, and Erik really pursued a lot. He Erik wrestle with all sorts of stuff, being able to get the film together and to edit the film, and it's been a real amazing labor for him. I took a bit of a different approach to it, kind of standing back while Erik worked a lot more personally on this film. I had more technical side to it, but I did get to know Tommy, and it's kind of wonderful getting to know him and getting, you know, I mean, we went out to lunch multiple times, and every time that we'd come up to film, it was just it was a joy to be able to hang out with him and just kid around. And, you know, we walked around the neighborhood he lives in, and so it's been a joy to be able to, you know, to get to know him. And I've really enjoyed that. But I think Erik has a deeper adventure that he'll tell you about.
Well, I mean, there's a lot more to unpack, in the sense that I have a long history with Tommy, but I hadn't seen him in a very long time.
Right.
And through the Why Make project, it just came up that, you know, Tommy serendipitously moved to North Carolina. He moved to within 4 hours of our doorstep.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seemed like, you know, I've been
Too
going
good to
through
be
this
true, almost.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was a really hard time for me. There was a lot of loss involved. I lost a parent. I sort of lost my creative link in the studio, and I really struggled. And this film really helped me to focus and see through. So it was really important in that sense, because, as I said, I'd been struggling a lot. And also, it was just my brother was a very brilliant creative person. I mean, he was the principal of Boundless. So when the Garden of the Heart was being done, I was talking with my brother all the time. I knew about the process. I know you know, I've known all the Boundless people for years, and it was fascinating to hear about it. And it was absolutely wonderful to be able to dig up the original footage from the American Craft Museum, of that. And it's just, the whole process has been not only getting to sort of reacquaint myself with Tommy, but sort of reacquaint you know, sort of get to feel close to my brother. And, you know, my brother was a very inspiring person for me. You know, so in that sense. So, I mean, doing this documentary film has really sort of opened up a whole bunch of new ideas. And, you know, I love the relationships I've been able to make with artists. And through doing this, as I said, we had a wonderful conversation with Wendy Murayama a month or so ago. And it's just, it's become real important to me to put these oral histories out there. And Tommy's history is very important, I think, to the craft world and to the fine art world. And it's also, like I said, is important for me to tell it. And I could blab on forever. I think I'll stop there.
Well, lucky for you, you mentioned the Boundless collaboration, and one of our audience members wants to hear more about that, the music, the dance, and how that all came together. So,
Well, the Boundless was in Washington, where I had a house. And so they all became friends, Robbie and Jonathan and everybody. And it was also sort of in the same realm as they were all at Dartmouth, and they were all engineers and chemistry and English people, and they all never danced before, and they all took an elective, and they all gelled, and they all said, "Oh, do you do this?" You know, and somebody else could dance on their head, and somebody else could do this, and nobody else, because they weren't professional dancers, and they all just sort of gelled and called themselves Boundless. And it was sort of a wonderful allowing that aspect of themselves to come forward. And now they've been in existence for 50 years, and a lot of other different dancers are part of the modern dance thing. But it's doing the same thing with furniture or pottery or something, but it happened to be dance, you know, and it's still art. You know, instead of the merchandising that art is a big painting that costs $3 million, you know, that art can be just your kids dancing in the living room, you know, with a pan and a spoon, you know. And to really look at art and what it is, we're all artful if they just allow it to happen and enjoy it. I don't know.
I mean, I could talk a little bit about the actual
sitting on a
process of making the
soapbox, so
piece,
don't-
if you'd like. Would you like me to talk a little about that?
Sure, go ahead.
So I actually did interview I interviewed one of the Pallablis dancers, and about the making of the piece, and true to the Pallablis' collaboration with Tommy, the piece, Pallablis itself choreographs from a very collaborative basis. My brother didn't write the choreography. They do the choreography pretty much as an ensemble. And as Tommy would bring the pieces in, they would interact with them. And actually, one of the dancers has the moon from Garden of the Heart,
Right.
and she was just, it's huge. It's 7-8 feet tall, and she just started interacting with the moon, and it's just part of the wonderful part of the process is that as Tommy brought the pieces in, they started moving around them and learning and that's how the piece created. I mean, there was this sort of Garden of Eden thing, and obviously, Tommy, you were referencing some sort of Indian mythology, but
Right.
it all had to do with the pieces. The pieces were what the dancers referenced, and it's very interesting to hear about the process. I mean, again, there's so much that was involved in the research and making of this film that never made it to the film, which is unfortunate. But when you only have enough money to do 20 minutes, you have to figure out what story it is you're going to tell. But I think Tommy's work and the dancers coming together and that exploration was a big part of how that piece was choreographed and how that Garden of Eden story was told.
And they had a local woman who wrote the music for it.
Yes, exactly. And that was the music in the film.
It's like if you had you made furniture and you had a show, did you ask somebody to write music for the show? Or write a page of poetry about it or something, just to interact and have fun that way.
All right, we're starting to run out of time, but I just want to say that I want to thank Erik and Robb for all of their hard work to put this documentary together, to showcase Tommy and his long-lasting legacy on the craft world and on people. And I think that's probably the most important thing for me walking away, is that Tommy's legacy is more than just the work he leaves behind. And the stories he tells and the stories he shares are the stories of the people he's met and the things that he's done. And I think that's an incredible message. But I want to leave Tommy with the last word. So I want to give Tommy 1 minute to just share one message about something that you want all the viewers to take with them after this program.
To believe in themselves and to actually involve themselves in some sort of activity that gives them self-awareness and self-worth and everything else, because that you'll have forever, and all your friends and your children and your parents will enjoy that aspect of it. And if I could give that to somebody, I would, have raffle tickets or something. If I could do it. But I would encourage people to, if I can do it, you can do it.
Thank you so much, Tommy. We appreciate you being here and taking the time to chat with all of us.
Thank you, Tommy.
Well, thanks
And
for the
thank you.
wonderful film.
Thanks, Robb and Erik.
Yes.
And thank you,
Welcome.
Kendall and Beth and the Fuller Craft Museum, for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Very wonderful of you guys to do that.
Happy to
Fabulous,
have you.
Yeah,
fabulous evening.
the world is much fuller with the Fuller Museum.
Oh, good.
Hey,
Good note to end on.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you all soon. And thank you. Have a good
Cheers.
evening, everyone.
Look at that part.
Bye.
That's great.